These protesters in Mexico City say cross-border migration is changing their country's capital for the worse.
Well. Looks like the shoe is on the other foot now. And while I support the marchers, I do find it a bit ironic that they're being even more clear about it than we are here in the States. Yet I don't see anybody complaining about xenophobia. I also don't see any American anti-protesters wrapped in United States flags setting things on fire. I mean, they're just in Mexico City for better lives, you guys. But Mexico is saying, go home, Gringos. Take it somewhere else, drybacks. And how can anybody not be welcomed on stolen land? If you guys aren't familiar, before Mexico City was part of New Spain, it was the Aztec capital. I mean, Mexico City has only been the capital of Mexico since 1821 when Mexico won independence from Spain. So it just seems a little convenient to me that now all of a sudden Mexico City is fully Mexico. But California can't be the United States, and now suddenly we're worried about the evils of immigration. Oh, and I saw some people in the comments in some of the videos where people had posted footage of these protests, and people were saying Mexico would be nothing without our tourism. Be very clear, Mexico does not mind taking American tourist dollars. They just don't want Americans moving into and living in Mexico, and more specifically, Mexico City. But let's go on with the story.
Over the last decade, an influx of mostly American so-called digital nomads have moved here to work remotely and also enjoy a cheaper cost of living.
Oh, so they're having the opposite problem of what we're having over here, where their people come here and drag everything down. Our people are going there and hiking everything up. I get it. Sounds like everybody should just stay home and call it a day to me.
Protesters say the newcomers have driven up rents beyond the reach of locals.
Okay, so just to be clear on what we're looking at, it's okay to hold up a sign that says Mexico is for Mexicans, but if we hold up signs that say America is for Americans, suddenly we're everybody's favorite word. I'll give you a hint. Starts with a ray, ends with a cyst.
If they're going to live in a country, they have to contribute to that country. The first and simplest issue is legal migration. They come here with visas or no visas.
So you're saying visas or no visas, you don't want them. You just want them gone. But we here in the United States say that we're fine with people being here legally, and we still get told how small-minded and discriminatory we are. But if Mexico says visas or no visas, we don't want you, everybody's fine with that, and the mainstream media isn't even talking about it.
And still the change in purchasing power generates these problems of gentrification and displacement.
Gentrification. Next thing you know, you're going to have a Starbucks nobody asked for, a bunch of they-thems trying to run everything. Before you know it, they're going to stop seasoning the food at restaurants. Everybody's going to be speaking English. Don't turn out like us, Mexico. What's up, everybody? Ty Rivera here, the absolute best LGBTQ comedian in the world. All right, so I wanted to talk about this story. It was sent to me by my friend Valerie on Instagram. Thank you very much, Valerie. If anybody ever wants to send me a suggestion, I get kind of a lot of them, so I can't obviously do all of them, but sometimes there will be one that hits me a particular way. So go ahead and send that to my Instagram. I'll put my Instagram link down below in the pinned comment. That's the best place to get a hold of me. Sometimes things get by me there too. It's a little less likely though. I'm sorry I can't get to everybody all the time. I do my best. But the reason that I wanted to talk about this is because just like I think we here in the United States should be able to say that we don't want everybody here and we don't want to adopt your way of life, I feel like the Mexicans in Mexico should be able to do the same thing. I honestly do feel like, at least for a while, until everybody can kind of figure everything out, which I know may take a bit, I think everybody should just stay in their own native countries for the most part. Yeah, go travel, go visit, but I don't think we all need to be living in other people's countries. No offense to my friends that do live in other countries. I know some people are able to fly under the radar and be expats in different places, but what I notice in a lot of those cases is it's usually people that are really willing willing to assimilate into the culture that they choose to live in. It's not usually the people that want to be militant and change things. And while I don't think that the people that are going to Mexico are necessarily militant, I don't think they realize that the way that they change the way of life for the Mexican people is it does drive things up and make things unaffordable for the locals, which we're going to hear more about in this story. But also what some people don't pay attention to is a lot of times when Americans go different places, and I'm not talking about just white people, even though I know the title of the video is Go Home Gringos, and a lot of people are saying Go Home Gringos. I saw somebody saying that in Southern California, gringo is actually synonymous with POS. It's not. That's not the way most people use the term gringo. Gringo is just a white person. It's as basic as that. If you want to refer to it as being dismissive, that I might go with you on. But as far as it being outright derogatory and really a slur, not really. And some people actually embrace the term gringo and some people use it affectionately. But for the most part, it's a word for me that kind of gets a zero read. It's just kind of like a gringo. Dos Gringos is a very popular bar. I don't remember if that's in Arizona or if that's in California. But anyway, what I was getting at is sometimes what Americans will do, and this is Americans of every race because it just comes with American entitlement, which I've accused myself of before. It's something that I am guilty of. I am very American. I fully do own that. But what I'm not guilty of is I don't treat every place like I'm just on a permanent vacation and it's disposable. And that's something that Americans will do sometimes, and it's very disrespectful. In a lot of cases, Americans will assume because a place that they're in maybe doesn't have the same value for their dollar, or in this case, their peso, that we do here in the United States, they'll go ahead and treat it like they don't have to respect the people and they don't have to respect the land because they can afford to pay to be there, or they can afford to pay more to be there. Because they can throw money around and because they do have that kind of American attitude, sometimes that'll be pretty destructive in itself. And so I do fully acknowledge that. But at the same time, I do find it very ironic that suddenly now we want to worry about immigration. Suddenly now we can worry about enforcing our borders. And it doesn't matter if you came there legally or illegally, they just don't want you. So let's go on with the story. Before we go any further, I am going to ask that you like, comment, and subscribe. We're on our way to 100,000 subscribers. When you hit the subscribe button, click the bell and select all notifications so that you know every time I upload. Now let's get on with it.
I'm here because gentrification is just one more step towards colonization, dispossession, and the exploitation of our resources. Right now it's about the people, but it won't be long before they run out of oil, water, or lithium in other countries and come and take them from us.
And I'm not trying to be rude, but she is the person to talk about this. If you notice, she is very indigenous looking. And just to be clear, it's because I'm taking this in context. Like, this is Mexico we're talking about right now. So if a woman that looks very indigenous speaks up and says these are her concerns, she would be technically of the land and the person that you'd want to listen to. So when they're talking about resources and stuff like that, I get what she's saying, and yeah, that is definitely a thing. But when we're talking about culture, we've seen this happen in the United States, and so I could see a person not wanting this to happen in their neighborhood, or even more importantly, in their capital city. Because I don't know if people really pay attention to the way gentrification works or have seen it in action, but I will tell you, when I first moved to LA back in 2003, there were certain neighborhoods that were very much Latino neighborhoods. And in a lot of cases, these were fully legal United States citizens, Latinos, but they still had that Latino flavor to them. And these neighborhoods that they would inhabit were very much of Latino culture. Like, there were quinceañeras all the time, weddings, loud music playing. And don't get me wrong, these weren't rundown areas. In a lot of cases, they were very well kept. You know, Mexicans in a lot of cases are cleaning ladies and landscapers. So their houses would be clean, their neighborhoods would be relatively clean. And what happened was, white people would notice this and be like, it's really affordable over here. Maybe we should check it out. Maybe we should consider buying a house. And they would move into these neighborhoods. They would tell their friends about it, or their friends would hear about it. And eventually these neighborhoods would get gentrified to a point where they no longer had the Latino flavor. I remember I was part of the gentrification process in one particular neighborhood. Mount Washington is what it's called. My roommate at the time bought a house there, so I moved into the house because we had been living in a different spot. So when we moved to Mount Washington, that was when the realtors were really trying to push it to people. And so more and more white people started living in this particular area, and it was a neighborhood like what I'm describing. It was clean, it was nice, it was still affordable for LA, and eventually people started complaining about the music. They would call the police on people that were having parties, and it really does change the flavor of the neighborhood. And before you know it, the neighborhood still has remnants of the fact that it was a predominantly Latino neighborhood at one time, but the people that actually built that neighborhood no longer could afford it, because that's what happens with gentrification. Once they start getting a clientele that can pay a bit more, suddenly they want everybody to pay that. So if it's not a rent control area, because certain areas of LA are rent control, but if it's not a rent control area, what they'll do is just jack up the prices on everybody once their lease is up, and suddenly the people that used to inhabit that neighborhood can no longer afford it. Another shady thing that I've seen them do before is where it'll be an apartment situation and they'll be real loosey-goosey with the way that they'll let people rent or the way that they'll allow people to live there. Like there was one point where I lived in a studio apartment that I really did like, and there was another group of people living in a studio as well, and they had set up 2 bunk beds, so they had 4 people living in a studio. Well, in your lease, it said you're only allowed to have 3 people at the most living in a studio. But when they're just trying to get people in and gentrification isn't on the horizon, they'll be like, okay, there's 4 of you guys. It doesn't matter. We don't mind. And then as soon as there's a chance for gentrification and they're able to raise the rent, suddenly now they'll enforce the rules and be like, I'm sorry, you're going to have to leave. And because those people in a lot of cases are on a tight enough budget that they do need to live for that studio apartment, then they all have to move out. Well, now the manager is able to rent that out at the new price. So I do understand the dangers of gentrification. And if anybody wants to know the neighborhoods that I'm talking about other than Mount Washington, check out Echo Park in LA, check out Silver Lake, check out Los Feliz. Those are 3 neighborhoods that have very much been gentrified to a point where they're probably unrecognizable to a person that maybe hasn't been there since early 2000. And again, I get it when that happens here in the United States. That's just the way things work here. I'm not going to complain about it. I'm not going to act like anybody's been particularly victimized by it. But I can see what a person like this lady is saying when she's saying, I don't want that to happen in my country. I don't want Mexico City to turn into an American city. Just like here in the United States, we shouldn't have to live like we're in Mexico if we're in a neighborhood here in the United States.
Many Americans in Mexico are able to still receive high salaries in dollars from U.S. companies by working on laptops from their apartments.
The government is directing its public policies towards people with higher purchasing power, often illegally displacing local populations.
Sounds to me like money talks and bullshit walks. And considering you all are marching right now,
who have lived in these neighborhoods for 40, 50, and we have even documented cases of up to 60 years. In 5 years, rents have increased by 47%. This is violent for the local population.
Yeah, that does sound terrible, and I could see how that would be a problem. Now imagine if our people were going to your country and taking up your social services, getting on your welfare, your food stamps, which I don't even know if Mexico has that kind of stuff. Maybe I should know that, but I don't. I live here. But imagine if that's what was happening. Your problem seems to be that our people are going to your country and spending too much money, where we have the opposite problem here. Because like when I mentioned the people living 4 to an apartment, a lot of times what'll happen in those types of situations is the reason that they're living that way is so that they can send as much money back to Mexico or wherever it is they're from, say El Salvador, as they possibly can. So they'll live 4 to an apartment. They'll get paid under the table, so they're not paying taxes on the money that they're making. And then they'll send as much of that money as they possibly can to another country. So it's not even money that's being redistributed into our economy. So while I do understand what you're saying, it seems really unfair that we get called all the names that we get called when it really is more of a situation where people come here and leech off of our system and our country and our tax dollars, and our people are just guilty of adding too much to your economy. Now make that make sense. But again, I am on the side of these people, and it's for my own selfish reasons, because my thinking is, if all of this is a part of making Mexico as great as it can possibly be and can maybe entice your people to stay in your country, I am for it. Anything that keeps people from deciding to just come here, and especially illegally, I am 100% for. So you get those dry backs out of your country.
We are debating whether to pay for electricity, water, or food. Of course, we choose to eat.
Some activists blame Mexico's government for encouraging them.
Their government is notoriously greedy, and until they, as a people, and I mean these same people that are in the streets marching right now, are able to do something about not only their own government, but I hate to say it, the cartels as well, which I don't really know how they would take on that fight in the first place, and I myself wouldn't recommend it. But I'm just saying, unless that was something that they were willing to do or trying to do, I'm not really sure how they would fix their system, because their government doesn't care about them at all. And that's something I wish somebody would really call Claudia Sheinbaum and anybody else in charge in Mexico to the carpet about, is why are things so terrible for your people?
However, there's no simple fix. Imposing tougher visa restrictions on Americans could worsen relations with the U.S.
That's where I'm not really sure if this reporter has it correct, because I don't really think that President Trump or anybody over here would be particularly upset if they made the visa process for getting into Mexico more difficult. What I would imagine the problem is that Mexico doesn't want to seem at all unwelcoming of Americans, because that really could hurt their tourism. And I'm sure that Mexico does rely on American dollars quite a bit as far as tourism goes. And I think that's the real reason that they don't want to mess with that process.
Mexican citizens in the U.S. also send billions of dollars in remittances back to their families in Mexico.
And referring to it as remittances was just a fancy way of saying what I was saying. They're sending the money that they make here back to their families in Mexico so that they can sustain themselves, so that they could possibly live better than they would live if they were just working off their wages that they were making there. Which I'm not going to fault anybody for that, especially when it comes to being Latino, because being Latinos, that is a big part of it. Taking care of your family is a really big thing. But at the same time, do I think that we as Americans should have to suffer or do with less, or have people not paying the same taxes that the rest of us are paying, while in some cases still getting the same benefits and sometimes more benefits than we get as an American? I don't think that's a very fair system at all. And I don't think that that's something that anybody should put on us or make it seem like we're being unreasonable, unfair, or especially racist because we don't want to be passive participants in this idea that you have that we're supposed to somehow take care of you, or else we're being one of those terrible things that nobody should ever want to be.
In a world where travel and communication are faster and easier than ever, these two nations are finding it harder to have neighborly relations. Wilson Dysart, Al Jazeera.
I don't really know, if you were to boil it down, if we really are finding it harder and harder to have neighborly relations. I don't really think that's the case. I think there's a relatively small amount of people in Mexico that have a real problem with Americans being in Mexico in general. And then here in the United States, we have a relatively small amount of people that are really ride or die for Mexicans being here illegally. And I think when people say that Americans are racist and that they don't want any Mexicans here, I don't think that's true at all. I also don't think that Americans are eventually trying to get rid of all Latinos, even the legal ones, because I have people tell me that all the time. You know, when they're done with all the illegals, they're going to come for you next. Yeah, I know you guys like to try to scare people and say that, but I don't even know how that would be possible. Like, my family is here. My parents are both U.S. citizens. I was born a U.S. citizen. There's no part of me or my entire immediate family, and even my nephews, my nieces, all that stuff, that has any connection at all to Mexico. I don't even think we still have family members in Mexico. I'm sure distant. But as far as anything that would be even kind of closely related to me, we're not at all Mexican like that. So when people say that, I really do feel like it's just a scare tactic to make me feel like they're taking my people back, and they're not taking my people back. My people are the American people. I'm a United States citizen. That's what it is. And so I don't really buy into the fact that there's this huge amount of people here that are that way, and there's this huge amount of people that are there that way. I think there's small groups of people that just have this idea of a utopia where we're supposed to have no borders and everybody just goes wherever they want. And most of us get it and are like, yeah, there's borders for a reason, and there's a reason that things work the way that they do. But like I was saying, there are certain things that I don't notice in these Mexican protests. Like, I didn't notice any Mexican counter protesters that were saying that is xenophobic, or that they should allow the Americans to be there because the Americans are just trying to make better lives for themselves. I hadn't noticed any of that, and maybe they just didn't show it. Also, I think that in Mexico, one problem they're going to run into is that as their people start to adopt more and more American ways, they are going to have to deal with certain headaches that they probably don't necessarily want to deal with. Like, I saw a video of some protesters that were pro-Palestine protesters in Mexico, and they were trying to damage Mexican statues. And even this other citizens were like, no, you're not going to damage these statues. And they were talking about the genocide and everything else. That's very much an American thing. That's something that came from American influence. So that's something that I think will eventually start to make it so Mexico is going to put the clamps down on their people a little bit more and be like, hey, you guys are not the United States. You're not going to behave like the United States. It's going to be like a parent situation, you know, where they're like, all right, don't try to be like your little friends. I see how they talk to their mom. You're not going to talk to us that way. I think that's what's going to happen with the Mexico situation, their government, and the way that their people are trying to get kind of out of pocket when it comes to a lot of that stuff. But we'll see what happens. You guys let me know what you think down below in the comments. That's where I'm at on it. If you want to see a video of me talking about the fact that 4th of July was supposedly supposed to be canceled by one of the most inarticulate people that I've probably ever seen online, go ahead and click the video on your screen. Other than that, as always, thank you for watching. This has been Ty Rivera, the absolute best LGBTQ comedian in the world.
They bought into his bullshit.